evening, everyone. Welcome to the launch of Pro Bono Week 2021, the special 20th anniversary Pro Bono Week. My name is Toby Brown. On behalf of the organising committee which I chair, I'm delighted to welcome you to the launch event. We're very grateful to Gray's Inn for hosting us to a return to an in-person Pro Bono Week. Can I ask, if you want to wear a mask, please feel free to do so. Obviously, for drinks afterwards, that might be difficult. But we're also very pleased to welcome the online audience, streamed to those around the world. Can I thank particularly LexisNexis for having funded the tech as well as the refreshments for tonight. And as a final thanks before we get going, can I thank the National Pro Bono Centre for funding the important project management for Pro Bono Week as a whole. We've been very lucky to have Mary Dobson-Smith organising the week this year, again in fact. And in fact, before we kick off, if you're on social media, the hashtag is Pro Bono Week, and we do Pro Bono. So before the panel discussion, I'm delighted to welcome the Attorney General, Suella Braverman QC, who's kindly agreed to make some welcoming remarks. Attorney.
Good evening, everybody. And to those online, thank you for joining us this evening. It's an absolute pleasure to see so many people at an in-person event. It feels slightly uncomfortable, I have to say. I'm not quite sure how to interact with other human beings because of the pandemic, but it's so wonderful to come here to Gray's Inn and celebrate Pro Bono Week. I want to pay particular thanks to Toby and his team for the wonderful work that is being led throughout our profession, the spotlight that you're shining on the invaluable contribution that thousands of lawyers in our country make to those in need on a daily basis. And I'm really grateful to our excellent panel, Yasmin, Kirsty and Emma, for giving up their time this evening to again share their commitment and their expertise in this field. It's just breathtaking to me when I think about pro bono within the legal profession. On top of your incredible work and the enormous pressures that you face in your paid lives, you take time and effort to offer your skills on a pro bono basis as a true gesture of community support to the vulnerable. I also just must say before I go on that the Solicitor General, Alex Chalk, my colleague at the Attorney General's office, sends his apologies for this evening. He has been quarantined and in self-isolation due to a case of COVID, but he wants you to know that he also is incredibly committed to furthering and championing pro bono work during his time in government. I myself have very fond memories of undertaking pro bono work during my time in private practice, whether it's volunteering at the Free Representation Unit when I was a student, or whether it was work as a qualified lawyer with the Bar Pro Bono Unit, advocate as it is now, or as Yasmin and I just established over 10 years ago, I was lucky enough to be a Pegasus Scholar, and I spent a period of time at the New York office of Hogan Lovells. I'd qualified as a New York attorney, and I was engaged there in their litigation department on a large pro bono matter, which I hear is still going to this day. And I just gained huge amounts of experience, confidence, and knowledge, of course, by working as part of a team and practicing and honing my skills as a lawyer, which is something which has always been a constant focus of mine. But pro bono work, as you are all well aware, vitally contributes to the fair and good society, where those who can offer their skills to those in need in the pursuit of justice. And this celebratory week is an opportunity for us not only to draw attention to the fine achievements of pro bono efforts across the country, but to also encourage and promote more of this invaluable work. The solicitor and I are the government's pro bono champions, and as part of this, chair a panel and a committee to help steer and coordinate pro bono work across England and Wales. Our vision is for a country where legal capability is spread throughout our society, where everyone, every group, is able to identify legal issues and seek redress. The work you are doing is therefore a foundational part of this aim and reflects the thread and the theme, a golden thread of compassion running through our profession. It's a vital part of our identity as lawyers. A commitment to supporting those who can't afford legal services runs deep in our profession, recognizing the fundamental place that the law holds in society. All of you here are doing important work twice over, supporting the public by providing high quality legal advice so that the government can deliver services effectively and lawfully, whilst also supporting your community through taking the time to work pro bono. So I'm here to offer my sincere congratulations and thanks to each and every one of you for the inestimable benefit that you have brought to so many people through your generous support for pro bono causes. Thank you all again for this excellent work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Attorney. So if we now turn to the panel discussion, we will have questions at the end. So please do prepare your questions in the audience. And also if those online would like to post their questions during the debate, please do so in the chat function on Zoom. So I'm now going to ask, because we decided the panel should introduce themselves, to start with Yasmin.
Thank you, Toby. It's brilliant to be here, and it's so lovely to be amongst friends in an in-person event for the first time in a very long time. And to see so many old friends in the audience is also very, very welcome. I am Yasmin Waljee. I'm a partner. I lead the pro bono practice within the firm internationally. Toby structured this event as sort of past, present and future. I'm a bit of the ancient past, the ghost of Christmas past in a way. I was appointed in 1997 as the first full-time pro bono associate with any law firm across Europe and the UK, and I'm now the first full-time partner in the UK, but that has been followed. We have a strong practice like many other law firms, and pro bono is now a strategic aim of the firm, which means that it sits in equal measure with the fee earning practices, which is a fabulous investment and is now being followed by other firms. I welcome the Attorney General's speech, and particularly the aspiration of compassion, because I'm proud to be part of the do-gooding lawyer community. And I feel that that should be inherent in all of our practices. So just a little bit about the practice that we've done. We started in really focusing on victims' rights to some extent. We helped the London bombing victims and the families affected. We were undertaking the inquest work and the criminal injuries compensation work, one of the first firms to secure compensation for victims of trafficking. And now we've taken that into the international sphere, and we're looking at the reparations for victims of Daesh as a result of the atrocities perpetrated by foreign fighters. So the work has really grown, and it's incredibly wonderful to be here today to talk about this.
Great, thanks Yasmin. Kirsty.
Good evening, and I also echo what Yasmin has said. I'm delighted to have been invited to come down from Scotland this evening and to be on this amazing panel. My name's Kirsty Thomson. I am a human rights lawyer in Scotland, but nearly 20 years ago I started my legal career in a large commercial law firm in Scotland before moving into the not-for-profit sector. And nearly 5 years ago I co-founded a law centre called JustRight Scotland. And our commitment then was to not do anything alone, to always work in partnership and in collaboration, and in particular to develop and strengthen pro bono work in Scotland with our law clinics and with our law firm partners. So delighted to be here this evening to share the experience from both sides in the debate.
Great, thanks Kirsty. Emma.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Emma Rehal-Wild, and again, I'm so happy to be at an in-person event and have an excuse to change out of my pyjama bottoms for the first time in 2 years. I'm a law lecturer at London South Bank University, and I'm also a supervising solicitor at the Legal Advice Clinic there, where we spend a huge amount of time advising on housing and family law, as well as the whole gamut of social welfare law. Up until 2020, however, I worked in law firms on pro bono delivery and management. So I've worked at large law firms in the city in their pro bono teams, including with Yasmin at Hogan Lovells. I'm also a trustee of LawWorks, and I'm currently working towards a doctorate in education, specialising in social justice and clinical legal education.
Great. So with that introduction, the theme, as you've already heard, is going to be sort of almost like we're still Halloween. It's the ghosts of past, present and future, but Yasmin is still very much in the future, so I'll regret saying that later when she pinches me. But seriously, in terms of what the organising committee decided for tonight, we really wanted, because it's this special 20th anniversary, to take a moment to look back 20 years, not just for the sake of reminiscing, but to think about how the 20 years of development in the sector can inform the next 20 years. So we will try to progress through the past, present and the future over the evening, and we'd love to hear your thoughts as well as questions, as I mentioned, at the end. So shall we start then with Yasmin? Where were we 20 years ago? Can you set the landscape? Where were we 20 years ago?
Well, it's really nice to be able to look backwards in some ways, because I think it's important to address how far we've come in such a short period of time, because sometimes it feels like we're not making progress, but we genuinely are. When we first started, we were kind of advocating on three fronts. It was a particularly lonely position to hold as a pro bono associate in a major law firm and being the only one in the profession, but we were advocating with civil society to try and talk to legal aid organisations, justice organisations, about what the potential we could bring, particularly as commercial lawyers, and how we could help. We were advocating with the legal aid community, who were actually quite suspicious of our work and whether or not we were infringing on their areas. Were we entering in where the state should necessarily pay? And it was really important to ensure that we were supplementing rather than substituting legal aid, and that is a constant theme that continues through to this day. And then finally, you're also advocating within our own law firms to try and, well, in honesty, persuade people that you were there for a reason, that it was a good reason that you were being employed, and that actually you weren't just an overhead, you were an important part of the profession. So it was an interesting time, but over that time, we've worked in collaboration, we've seen the profession grow, the pro bono profession, and now we have a good few pro bono partners and associates.
So going back to what you say about having to convince partners, I mean, who got it 20 years ago? Were you really having to tell your partners pro bono was important? It's not Chatham House rules here, by the way.
I think it was inevitably, in a large community of lawyers, there are those that were more focused on the fee earning, growing that part of the business, and seeing pro bono as an add-on to the mainstream of the business, whereas now it's strategically implemented. So definitely it was a matter of trying to persuade people around you that actually you had something to give, and the firm standing would be improved by you engaging in pro bono work. But it was hard work, yes. We had to persuade people.
And it presumably was hard work. You were the first full-time pro bono coordinator. I mean, was it hard work to coordinate? I mean, bluntly speaking, did the pro bono sector exist? Was it even coordinated at all 20 years ago?
To begin with, it wasn't. And it was about persuading, it was having influence without power. It was trying to persuade people around you to engage. And to be honest, people within young lawyers have always been impassioned about delivering pro bono. So it was about capturing that enthusiasm for delivery and mobilising that as your constituency then to move forward.
It's almost difficult, I guess, to imagine where we've gone over 20 years. I mean, should we think about Scotland to make sure this is UK focused? Where were we 20 years ago north of the border?
Yep, so from my perspective and recollection, from working in a commercial law firm at the time, I recall one of our senior partners, even then, really recognising the importance of pro bono, the need for it for the junior lawyers working within the law firm. And there was a real recognition of its importance, but there was nowhere to channel that. So picking up on Yasmin's point, there wasn't the coordination, there wasn't the structures for that intention to go anywhere. And it took us a lot longer to catch up, I think. And when I moved into the not-for-profit sector, again, there wasn't there was a recognition again that there was a need for pro bono, but again, how to channel that, where was that coordination? It wasn't there, so it faltered. So recognition and a desire on both parts, but nowhere for that to come together.
You say it faltered. I mean, it's quite important, I think, to think about what didn't work and what went wrong to start with, so we can realise what we have made in terms of progress. So Emma, can you think of what was not working? What should we focus on to help us inform the future? What was not working 20 years ago, or over the last 20 years?
So I think one thing that maybe the sector struggled with was how to go about marketing pro bono. You know, is it something a little bit fun that you do when you've got a spare 20 minutes? Yasmin used to show this brilliant cartoon of someone pressing an intercom saying, "Bring me a little pro bono to cleanse my palate," which I'll never forget. You know, that there was this sort of misunderstanding of what pro bono actually was, and I think over time we've seen, over the last 20 years, we've seen a greater understanding of what pro bono is for people doing it, for people receiving pro bono advice, but also the firms that allow it to flourish, and also firms that promote pro bono partners. So I think over the last 20 years, we've seen a much better understanding of what pro bono is substantively. It's about core business, and it's about getting the right people around the table to make the right decisions when it comes to the firm as a whole. So who was round the table, Yasmin, 20 years ago? Was there a table? Might be the first question.
There was. I mean, we were one of the founders of the Solicitors Pro Bono Group, which then came into being LawWorks, but many of the major firms were already being committed. There was generally a coalescence around the need to collaborate and move forward. So there were the beginnings of the networks that we have today. Internationally, we had the support of the Attorney General's International Pro Bono Committee, and that began to develop at the same time. So that was all the nascent institutions. FRU began to exist. And it's not that pro bono was new, it has always been in existence. I think the patron saint of pro bono is Saint Eve, and he was around in the 13th century. So possibly the first and last lawyer to ever be canonized, but it became much more coordinated as we moved forward.
And are there particular staging posts in the last 20 years that you might draw out? You talked about, so the Advocate was formed 25 years ago. You talked about LawWorks. Are there other sort of high points that you can flag across the journey over the last 20 years?
I would say the formation of the collaborative plan, I think, has been really formative. And
do you want to explain? Not everyone will know the plan.
Okay, so the collaborative plan is a network of law firms who have committed to the aspiration of doing at least 25 hours per fee earner per year. And over a period of time, we've seen the number of those grow. We've seen also the commitment of the Law Society through the Law Society's Pro Bono Protocol, and now the Pro Bono Charter. So there have been, real strides forward, although there's always much more that we can do and more firms that we can bring into the fold.
And what about north of the border? Are there particular staging posts that you can highlight in Scotland in the last 20 years?
Yes, undoubtedly the introduction into Scotland of more multinational law firms, bringing with them that knowledge, that coordination, pro bono teams, that for me was really shifted the ground with which we were working on, and really we took strides forward, I would say, in the last 6-7 years, as we could then become part of this journey and learn from all of this, you know, the knowledge and take from the resource and the capacity that these law firms brought, basically. So it was that all of a sudden there was these structures. You need, for me, for a good pro bono program to work, you need good partnership and good supported coordination. And the introduction of these law firms with all of that into Scotland really was a ground shift.
So it's a very interesting point to see actually how these English firms or these US firms that have set up branches in Scotland and helped introduce a new, more coordinated pro bono culture in Scotland.
Absolutely, and undoubtedly not just in Scotland, in other areas outside of London as well. We've just become part of this journey, which has been fantastic.
And Emma, I know you haven't been in the education sector your whole career, but have we seen a similar level of coordination change? I mean, law schools is what I'm focusing on with you for this moment. Have we seen that change in law schools too?
So I've only been in academia for about 18 months, so it's difficult for me to comment on the history of law schools. But one thing I did want to comment on was pro bono costs orders, actually, if I may, Toby, because I thought the introduction of pro bono costs orders, I think it was in 2007, I think it just fundamentally changed the way a lot of lawyers think about pro bono and how it's now possible to use this, a very common tool that all barristers and solicitors are familiar with in the courtroom, costs orders, but with a pro bono twist. And so I really think that really introduced or really strengthened pro bono as a very normal operating feature of the legal sector. So I have dodged your question a bit there, Toby, but I hope I made up for it.
Absolutely. Do ask for a pro bono cost order, everyone. Important. And of course, we saw with that the establishment of the Access to Justice Foundation and the network of legal support trusts around the country, which have taken the work from the London Legal Walk and spread the fundraising efforts across the country. And of course, we saw the establishment of the National Pro Bono Centre here in London. And so there's been quite a host of developments. You talked about the collaborative plan. That we could probably spend the whole evening, in fact. But in fact, perhaps that's given us quite a good staging post with a flavour of what's happened in the last 20 years to come to the present, because the present has some great things that's happening in the sector and some still challenges. So why don't we start with Kirsty, and I'll pose a similar question to you. Where are we? What is the current state of play? That is not an easy question to answer in 2 minutes, but I'll see if you can, please.
Yeah, no. Well, I think everyone who's working within Access to Justice knows that these are challenging times. We still have to see the full impact of COVID. We're seeing emerging challenges coming from things that are happening outside of the UK, like recent events in Afghanistan. And there are challenges that we're going to see in the future, and we're seeing that play out in my hometown of Glasgow this week with COP. And what that's doing at the minute for frontline organisations like myself and others around the country is that demand's increasing for our services. That demand, how that looks, the need is more complex. And our limited resources are having to stretch that much further and are going to have to stretch even more further, looking into the future. To give an example, we run a national legal helpline in Scotland for victims of gender-based violence. The demand has gone through the roof. There's hundreds and hundreds of calls at the minute that we just cannot answer. One, because the demand's increased, but two, because we're spending longer on the phone because the issues are more complex. And we can't look at this without looking at the sector that we operate in and the underfunding of that sector. In Scotland, in the last decade, we've seen a quarter of law firms and solicitors providing criminal legal aid go, and about a fifth providing civil legal aid. And we have seen some funded initiatives in Scotland in the last year, but at the same time, when the pandemic struck, those that were providing legal aid assistance, almost overnight had to stop doing it. And we had women really requiring urgent assistance and being unable to find a legal aid lawyer, particularly in remoter or more rural areas. So increasing demand, increasing complexity, and limited resources having to be stretched further. And that's where pro bono comes in. Thank goodness, 5, 6, 7 years ago, in Scotland, we really started to develop further because we need pro bono initiatives. We really need them now, and those structures are there. And not only are they there, but the creative ways that partnership working that is happening to try and meet some of that need is exceptional.
Set against those challenges, demand, resources, complex problems, you say that pro bono is trying to meet some of those challenges. How much is it helping? Let's try and be real. Is it a small percentage? And can you put a figure on it if you were pressed?
I mean, in our organisation, pro bono is now part of nearly every area of law that we operate in, be that in partnership with a law firm or a law clinic. That wasn't like that a few years ago. And a few years ago, we might have operated a couple of models. Now, law firms and law clinics are coming to us and saying, we want to help. What is it that we can do? And not only do they want to help, but the offer is to do it in ways that we wouldn't have done it, even 2 years ago. So no, we'll take the cases, and it just means that what's happening, a momentum is building. It already started to build. This need is making that momentum go further, and bringing with that confidence to be more creative, develop more models. That means we're more effective, and it does matter. These problems are big, and we absolutely do more, and we're more efficient and more impactful together.
So I wonder if that's a situation that's shared down here in England. You've heard how Kirsty has explained the challenges faced in Scotland and how they are having law firms increasingly coming to the advice sector offering to help. But how much of that help, to put the same question to you, can pro bono actually deliver here in England?
Yeah, I think the pandemic exposed our real fragilities as a society and the complex needs of the people without access to justice and legal aid has been incredibly focused. You can see it. We've had a 5-fold increase in welfare benefits appeals. And whilst we can try and address some of that, there is absolutely no way that we are scratching the surface of the unmet legal need. The truth is, it needs a comprehensive legal aid commitment to that. And I think what's interesting is that often people see criminal legal aid as being obviously important, and sometimes I think civil legal aid is often treated as the Cinderella service, when actually people in society will mostly come across civil legal aid and the need for that, and whether that's welfare benefits, housing, immigration. And I feel that actually there are ways of structuring the financing where you could actually liberate more pro bono legal help to support that, not to substitute it, but to support it. And I think that's really important. And we need to constantly ask ourselves the question is, are we actually substituting for legal aid in the services that we deliver? And we can't. You know, the firms that can have the resources to be able to deliver pro bono are generally commercial firms, but the skill set isn't appropriate for some of this work. So there needs
because
to
a
be
lot of work is welfare.
Benefits, and private
housing.
client work, which is not done. Obviously, there's a geographic discrepancy as well, which we've always talked about. So the rural parts that Kirsty was talking about is problematic for the UK too. So I do think, to some extent, we, for example, when the pandemic happened, moved our entire welfare benefits service online and dealt with it that way. We could get through more, but it wasn't, in reality, it wasn't meeting the needs of the civil society organisations that we work for, even with all the other lawyers coming forward too. And we've tried to develop tech approaches to this. So developing apps that you could potentially do, chatbots, all the rest of it. But complex needs need individual advice, and that needs to be funded.
How do we solve that problem then, Emma? The floor is yours. We don't have the Lord Chancellor here, but we have the Attorney General.
Well, actually, I just wanted to build on something that Yasmin was talking about with technology, because pro bono has become a real sort of bed for innovation when it comes to technology and in the delivery of free legal advice. And I'm thinking particularly about LawWorks, Any Legal Answers, and also the pro bono portal that LawWorks host, which provides a real opportunity for to collaborate, but also to work with clients in rural areas and for people who are working from home, lawyers who are working from home, to continue to work remotely. So helping address that unmet legal need. So I think technology is going to be a huge factor in addressing unmet legal need. But to go back to points that have been made before, pro bono cannot and does not exist in a vacuum. It actually relies on a fully funded, well-supported legal aid environment and climate. And I'll give an example from my own legal advice clinic, which is that last week we saw a client who it became clear when we were speaking to them that they were probably eligible for legal aid. And then my colleagues spent a day phoning 14 law firms that do legal aid work to try and get that client referred to them. And it was the 15th clinic, the 15th law firm that was actually able to take that work on. And this is work that they would have been paid to do, but the capacity is completely non-existent because they are just stretched beyond comprehension. And so we will not step on the toes of legal aid firms. We will not provide legal advice to clients that can and should get legal aid. And so that then prevents us from providing pro bono advice to people who can get legal aid, who are eligible to get it but can't actually physically access it. So in order to have a really strong pro bono sector, you actually need to have a very, very strong, well-supported legal aid sector as well.
So the importance of having a legal aid sector, that the advice sector and the pro bono sector can work together, because otherwise one cannot function without the other. And I guess we have to acknowledge that pro bono has become a critical part of the landscape now, but we have to continually say that it cannot substitute for a properly funded legal aid system. If we can get that message home, then where do we go next? Where should the current sector be focusing its efforts in meeting these challenges?
So I think one of the really interesting ways of looking at this is if we can properly fund law centres, they have and then have, you know, the diversity of solicitors within those law centres providing supervisory support. You can actually liberate the pro bono legal support within firms to try and be supervised to deliver an aspect of that particular work. So actually, by cutting back on law centre funding, all you're doing, as Emma says, is actually preventing pro bono work from being delivered. One of the challenges that we inevitably have is the lack of supervising solicitors to be able to supervise that work, those pro bono volunteers, to show that the delivery of the service is effective. So I actually think it's really good value for money to invest in the community legal sector in order to scale up pro bono.
So these are some of the challenges. We can come back to legal aid because it is a big topic, but these are some of the challenges, the resourcing topic we've discussed, the pressures on the advice sector, but what's working well? This can't all be doom and gloom. Kirsty, what's working well in Scotland currently?
Well, to pick up on what Yasmin is saying, it's that, really looking at where is the need, what do we have as a law centre in terms of the solicitors that we have, the areas of expertise that they work in. And then where can pro bono law firms really complement that? And it's really, working that through, working at how it is complementary. It's not a substitution of legal aid, and then delivering that. And one example recently is what's happening in Afghanistan. My law firm does do family reunification work, but one solicitor could probably only do about 6 or 8 of these, but yet working in collaboration with a network across the UK and beyond of pro bono law firms, supervising and training hundreds of solicitors within these law firms, all of a sudden you're talking about something different. And it's that momentum. What one lawyer in one law centre can do with 8 cases, what then can be done when you're part of that whole. And that has an impact on the clients that we're helping, but it also has a really important impact on the individual lawyers, the lawyers within the law centre, the lawyers with the pro bono law firms. It's really something when demand is so high and it feels like it's a drop in the ocean what I'm doing. When you pull together all of that expertise across the justice sector, it's amazing to be part of that and to learn from your colleagues, and don't underestimate the importance of that as well.
Well, it's great to hear the sector pulling together. Yasmin, Kirsty's talked about that wonderful way that the sector is working collaboratively together. Can you give us a good example of that down here in England?
Yeah, so I think there's some really exciting opportunities that expand as a result of the whole responsible business movement, which offer us opportunities because pro bono is now much more part of the business of law. And so the collaboration with clients also leads to scale, which is very exciting. The ability to work in partnership across professions. So with the management consultancy profession, the accountancy profession, and how we can scale up ideas, particularly for me around the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the impact that we can have as a global law firm with a global footprint. So, I think the ability to collaborate internationally across professions has the potential to do some really brilliant work. I particularly like, for example, the Chancery Lane project, which I think is an extraordinary collaboration, cross-profession, training lawyers to understand how our commitments to net zero, particularly at this really important time with COP26 starting today, and how we implement that through our day-to-day practice and then delivery on the ground internationally. So I think there are fantastic examples out there of collaborations together. I see Yasmin in the audience, and the work the Advocates for International Development do around that is really exciting too. So there is absolutely a positive part of all of this to bring about real change and real impact internationally and globally.
Can you give us a similar sense from law schools, Emma, of what is working well in the law school perspective? We've heard obviously about how it's working in the advice sector in Scotland, how it's working in law firms with A for ID, but can you focus for a second on what law schools are doing well?
Yeah, thanks. So our legal advice clinic the number of students that signed up for our legal advice clinic rose by 50% from last year. So students have an increasing appetite for doing clinical legal education. And it's increasingly becoming the case that it's becoming a module, so that it's not something that you do alongside your studies, it's an integrated part of your studies. And students, that's what we're going to be doing from next year. So that's a really exciting opportunity and something that we're seeing happen across the clinical legal education sector. And I think, with this, you talked about being a proud do-gooding lawyer, and I think having the opportunity to work with these young people, or actually people from all ages in the legal advice clinic, these are the do-gooding lawyers of tomorrow, and they are going to be absolutely fantastic because they, even with the pandemic, they can now provide very complex, very emotional, to very emotional clients, very complex legal advice to emotional clients through a screen. So there was a huge pivot to online, which some clinics really struggled with, other clinics did really well. We were able to move online almost immediately. And so there was no interruption to the students' experience, and the clients therefore had a kind of seamless delivery of legal advice. So that worked really well, and I think that shows that the clinical legal education sector in higher education is confident in itself, that it didn't all just sort of fall apart when the first lockdown was announced. So that bodes well for the future.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the future, because of course that's the final topic. And I'm going to stay with you, Emma. You of course teach law students, you teach the future legal profession. Do they care about pro bono?
They absolutely care about pro bono. Like I said, the numbers, we have an unprecedented number of students signing up for the legal advice clinic. But I do have some worries actually about the future of pro bono, which I'm going to share with you. So from this month, from November, the new way of qualifying as a solicitor has been introduced, the solicitor's qualifying exam. And so that's going to be testing students on functional legal knowledge and also skills. And if you go onto the SRA website, you'll see what is going to be covered in the functional legal. I see people nodding their heads in there, so they know that this is coming. The functional legal knowledge side of things, and also the skill side of things. And social welfare law is not covered at all. There's no family law, there's no housing law, there's no welfare benefits, there's no real mention of social welfare law at all. So what does that mean for pro bono? Well, maybe it's a real opportunity for pro bono, because it will mean that pro bono through clinical education will be able to fill the gap left by the SQE, the Solicitor's Qualifying Exam, because the SQE is not going to provide the incentive for students to learn social welfare law so they can gain the experience through pro bono, through clinical legal education. Also, pro bono will enable students to develop qualifying legal work experience, which is what the new requirement is for students to qualify as a solicitor, rather than the old training contract. I'm sure training contracts will continue, but work in advice centres, in the voluntary sector, will provide students with the opportunity to build their qualifying work experience by doing pro bono. But the threat for me is that the profession has sent a signal to students that social welfare law is not important, and that the only way they can get experience in social welfare law is through voluntary engagement with the pro bono sector, or through volunteering at an advice centre, or possibly getting paid work in an advice sector. But what that, of course, then means is that we need an advice sector and a legal aid sector that's really strong to be able to take those volunteers on, supervise them, and similarly, doing pro bono in a legal advice clinic at university. All of my colleagues are law centre and or legal aid solicitors. If we are sending the message now that social welfare law is not a viable career option because we're not examining students on it, then that will really impact, in my opinion, I have no evidence of this yet, in my opinion, this will really impact on the social welfare sector down the road, and that will impact on the ability to supervise pro bono in the future. So that's something to think about.
So what needs to happen then? The importance of making sure the future legal profession are interested and get experience in social justice, in welfare and benefits, in housing law, the areas that we know really have some of the greatest demand and need people to become lawyers in those specialties.
Well, I think the Justice First Fellowship is a fantastic model. So the Justice First Fellowship funds trainee solicitors in law centres and in the voluntary sector in social welfare, in areas of social welfare law. And what that does is it shows that a career in social welfare law is a viable option. And then, of course, hopefully those trainees will qualify, and then they might supervise pro bono volunteers in their advice sector in the future. They may well provide supervision at a clinical legal education, legal advice type clinic. So I think that the trick is going to be showing that a career in immigration law, in family law, in legal aid work, in social welfare more generally, is viable. We know it's interesting, we know it's challenging, we know it's engaging, but is it financially viable? Well, if we can show that it is, then I think that's going to be a step forward.
And if I might add to that, I think the implication for not doing that is really serious actually for the political establishment, because 2 to 3 years ago we did a survey of MP surgeries across London, and we took part of surveys of about 350 MP constituency sessions to work out what were the priority legal issues that were coming through MP surgeries, and they were welfare benefits, housing, and immigration. If there is no help or there is an obstacle to delivering that advice that comes from the SQEs, it'll end up at MP surgeries. And at the time, I said that MP surgeries were fast becoming the A&E of the legal world. Well, that's what will happen. It will just end up there. And so politically, it is not a wise move to not continue to encourage young people to go into social welfare law, family, housing, and legal aid generally.
And in Scotland, Kirsty, does the legal profession, the future legal profession, need that persuasion, or do they already get it?
It's similar in Scotland at the moment. I don't, as a colleague recently said to me, the price of being an access to justice lawyer can be too high sometimes. So we are seeing similar issues of people leaving and then trying to retain the future, retain what we have and then bring in the future. And that does come back to resourcing and the need to have a really well resourced legal aid sector. But whilst that's going on, we must keep developing the opportunities that have been mentioned for that future. And the Justice First Fellowship is key. We currently have 2 fellows working with us, and we're about to start a 3rd in January. The pathways from legal education and from law clinics are key. We have established programmes with law clinics at Edinburgh and the University of Strathclyde. We've seen people volunteer with us, train with us as part of the fellowship programme, or train elsewhere and come back and work with us. So it's about having, it's a bit like the development of pro bono with law firms in Scotland. It's about having those structured pathways so that people can see that career pathway, can see if I do this now, I can see that opportunity opening up there and thereon. And that does exist, and it is really exciting. It is really interesting to work in these areas of law. There are really good opportunities, and we must keep working at that whilst we keep keep working and fighting on the other structural parts of the system, such as resourcing and funding.
So you've all talked about how we might persuade the future profession to choose a career path that will lead them in direction of social justice areas. But what would the future professions say to us if they were here? If there are any law students here, I will bring you in for questions. But Emma, what do they say to you? Do they want to use pro bono to change the world? Do they want to shape society in a certain way? It's COP26. How do your students want to use pro bono?
For all of those reasons, and I'm sure that the reasons are the same when we were coming up and we were young boys. So no, the passion has not diminished at all, and unfortunately, I think the opportunities to realise those passions are where we're seeing a disconnect between supply and demand. So just to go back to my point, really, showing that the skills that they've learned in a legal advice clinic, those skills of empathy, the confidence that they develop, their sense of citizenship, it would be a shame for that to then fall off a cliff when they graduate and they can't go any further, because actually the passion and the enthusiasm is there. We just need to create pathways, exactly as you said, Kirsty, pathways into professions that can really harness that passion and that energy. So creating viable careers, sustaining viable careers in the legal aid sector, in the advisory sector more generally.
So with the benefit of thinking about the future legal profession in the way you've outlined, if we were to be here for the 40th anniversary of Pro Bono Week, where we might be sitting in the rows with our distinguished colleagues, Robin, Rebecca, Mike Napier, and the others who've been involved in this sector for a long time, what would we hope to hear from the panel of our successors here in 20 years' time when they look back and say, this is what's happened in the last 20 years? I'm going to give each of you 1 point to say what you want to see happen in the next 20 years. Yasmin.
I think I want us to have harnessed that spirit of enthusiasm amongst young lawyers and really do some fantastically groundbreaking work where we push out the rule of law and we challenge some of those inherent divisions in society. And we've started to look at the 21st century issues, particularly around how do we address the climate crisis that we're all facing, and that we will have a facility for doing that, and we will have collaborated both through our fee earning work and through the pro bono work to bring that together. That has got to be the fundamental issue that we address right now, is net zero and how we get there.
So net zero, can we reach it in 20 years? That's Yasmin's thought for the next 20 years. Kirsty, what needs to happen in the next 20 years?
Yeah, I would be really excited to see the developments that happen from this, the collaboration that's already there, as the need increases, climate, then the more creative and more collaborative we become as a sector. And all lawyers, future lawyers, law students, we all have a stake in ensuring that where we are in 20 years is strong, collaborative, creative. And just to end on that, just the Justice First Fellow that we're about to start in January is being funded by SCADN, and that is really exciting to see that partnership and what really embedded, and the funding, so that funding coming into a law centre with the fellowship. What will that person go on to learn, and those along with her, and it's that collaboration and creative collaborations.
So truly effective partnerships and collaboration. Emma, no mean feat now. Your turn, please.
So I would like to see a move from collaboration to participation. So we see every single stakeholder in this area, this sector, truly having a voice and a platform on which to talk about the best way to deliver and receive advice. And so that's going to involve the government, it's going to involve private practice, it's going to involve the voluntary sector, higher education, but also the clients themselves. And so, you know, harnessing all this really amazing and interesting work that's being done on legal design, to make sure that the advice that's given is the absolute best advice at the best time, in the best venue. You know, all of these things that we sometimes take for granted, but what do clients actually want? Do they want everything to be done online? Do they want a mix of online and in person? How do we respond to that? So that's what I mean by moving from collaboration to participation. So every voice is heard.
So involvement of the client in the way it's structured and organised. Great. Well, I think we've set some challenges for the future developments of pro bono in the next 20 years. We now have a few minutes for comments and questions. I've got one question to bring in online. I'm going to ask if people would just want to, I'm going to focus it just in the same structure we did before. I want to start just with the past. If people have any comments or questions about what has happened in the last 20 years, I'll start with that. Anyone want to comment on the last 20 years? Please, just wait for the microphone.
Thank you very much. So I work for Support Through Court, and picking up on the collaboration point, Support Through Court started 20 years ago, same sort of time scale that we're talking about. The number of people that we helped shot up, as you can imagine, after LASPO. And picking up on the collaboration point, pro bono is all about lawyers, but helping people is not all about lawyers. So how can we make sure that we are segmenting the work and actually dividing it between the different services that can do the things that people need, and make sure that the lawyers are using their legal skills to deliver legal advice, where other organisations can do the work around the legal advice that actually helps people get through. And it might be Support Through Court, it might be Systems Advice, there are all sorts of other agencies. But thinking about that collaboration and not just stopping at law firms.
Thank you. So dividing the work and making sure lawyers are doing effective legal work so others can contribute in other ways. Any further comments or questions on the last 20 years of developments? Otherwise, I'll put that question to the panel. Who'd like to answer that one?
It's absolutely the recognition that we are only one part of the delivery of an effective service to clients. And that, I think, needs better communication between all of us to bring about a way in which the clients, as Emma said, are respected and treated in the way that they want to be dealt with. And that having alongside you people who can work with the clients and take them through the challenging parts of this and support them through something which is incredibly stressful, it will lead to a better service for clients generally. And we see it on domestic violence cases that we act on. We have NGOs that work with us and work alongside us. We have corporate clients that can help us with aspects of the work, particularly on economic abuse, for example. So there are ways, but it's all about communication, I think.
I'm going to bring in the next question, but we can come back to this. Would anyone have a comment or a question on the current challenges facing... Well, I think that shows it's time to finish, clearly. We'll see. Those fireworks are not for us, but they should be. It's the 20th anniversary. Please, wait for the mic, and we'd love your comment or question.
Thank you very much for the panel. My name is Yasmin, I'm a student currently.
Speak up, please. Thank you.
I'm a current second-year student at the University of Greenwich. My question kind of links with the present as well as it kind of touches upon the future as well. Emma, I believe it was you who spoke about previously getting the right people around the table. And I feel that developments of corporate social responsibilities have taken a step in the right direction in holding firms accountable to this. I ask of you now who you feel are the right people to be around the table. And as a second part of my question, following on from that, is that if at all, do you ever see artificial intelligence playing a part in tackling some of the current issues we face with the increase in demand and complexity of the world?
Thank you very much. Emma or Kirsty, would you like to field that one?
I think to pick up on the theme, and actually the last question, you know, when you look at access to justice and the demand that we are facing, there are lots of different bits of the sector that require to come together, and not just lawyers. And that is the same as who needs to be around that table. Really, every aspect of the society, or the access to justice, civil society, that wraps around that individual. So that is your law clinics, it's your law society, it's your bars, it's your judiciary, it's your law firms, your law centres. We all have a stake in this. So it's really that getting everyone that's impacted and everyone that contributes around that table to start kind of speaking together, I guess, and trying to work out where are the gaps, where are the opportunities, where are we best placed, where are you best placed, what can we see coming, what do we require to develop, etc.
Thank you. Can I bring a question in? I'm going to ask a question to the audience in a second about the future, so please prepare your comment or question. Can I bring a question in from the online discussion from Martin Barnes of LawWorks? The panellists have highlighted wider issues about enabling access to justice. LawWorks, for example, has been developing a policy voice for pro bono. How might firms and in-house teams contribute to influencing policy? I guess this might be a question for you, Yasmin.
I think a lot of the time what we can do is to bring real life examples and evidence base. Certainly the research work that we've been doing, for example, with MPs to look at what is the necessity, having pilot programs around welfare benefits and delivering, how do we deliver that, is then what's the most effective way of delivering that service, and then providing that evidence to LawWorks to go and advocate with government around it. And I think we are best placed, alongside working with law centres, to put together a programme of evidence-based and testing to then pass on for the advocacy.
Thank you very much. So final comment or question. Who wants to tell us about the future here, please? Michael Napier, QC, please.
Thanks, Toby. My name is Mike Napier. I was the pro bono envoy to 4 attorneys general for, I think it must have been 3/4 of the 20 years of Pro Bono Week. Can I say to the panel, thank you for bringing out so much of what has happened in the past. This is a real landmark 20 years of Pro Bono Week. Those of us who were around for the first one could never have imagined this. And I think Ming Kong, who's on Zoom, should be listening to this, because she was the Attorney General's officer at the time, who instigated, along with the legal professions, the Law Society, the legal executives and the bar, the first pro bono unit, first pro bono week, forgive me. And here we are. It's something to celebrate, but for the future, the next 20 years, Toby, that you talk about, there's a word that's been mentioned tonight that I think really sums it up. Collaboration, or you might say coordination. The Attorney General was here this evening, and I was pleased to hear that there is still a committee of the law officers. I don't know what its focus is, but certainly without the coordination of the first Attorney General's Pro Bono Coordinating Committee, we would not, I think, be where we are today. Somebody talked about people around the table. That committee brought together the right people around the table. Yasmin, you mentioned the International Pro Bono Committee, of course important, but that was preceded by the domestic one, started, I think, by Sue Bugnall as much as anybody else who's here. And we would all celebrate and congratulate all those things that have been done in the past. But, and my but is this, the role that the law officers have played in the past, in my opinion, is absolutely vital. the professions can coordinate, our panellists can talk about collaboration, but I do believe that there is a strong responsibility on the law officers and through them the government to really appreciate that meeting unmet legal need isn't just a statement. That legal aid is not an adjunct to, pro bono is an adjunct to, not a substitute for legal aid. I used to know that off by heart in my sleep. Pro bono is an adjunct to, not a substitute for legal aid. That needs to be drummed in my opinion, to the law officers, if they haven't already got it, as one says, and into the government. Because without that leadership, all the work that you good people are doing and all that's been done in the past isn't going to have the effect that it needs to have, that's been brought out so very well by the panel.
Thank you very much.
That's what's needed for the future.
Thank you very much, Michael. So we're going to finish. I just put this finally to Emma then. Looking forward into the future, what should the role of the law officers be in terms of promoting or encouraging or coordinating pro bono? And you have 1 minute maximum, please.
Well, I mean, you know, when you to coin the phrase about who's around the table, I mean, they get to sit at the most important table, at the most important tables. So being an advocate for pro bono in the rooms where decisions get made, so being properly briefed by the profession is going to be important. But then to actually advocate for the legal profession, for a properly funded and supported legal aid sector, and to get that message across to the people that make the decisions, that hold the purse strings, that surely has to be the answer.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we started as we began with the Attorney General, but can I also start where we began by thanking our panel, as well as the Attorney General, Yasmin, Kirsty and Emma, for the really fascinating discussion we've had tonight, focusing on the past, the present and the future. Can I thank again LexisNexis and the National Pro Bono Centre for their sponsorship of tonight. And now we're not on Zoom, we can now, in the normal way, thank our panel tonight.
Thank you.
So please do continue the discussion over drinks, and we look forward to seeing you at the rest of the week's events. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Toby. It's so well.
Thank you.
That's good.